Hello to all my dear Manhwa fans. I hope you're having an amazing day. First of all, I want to give a special shout out to everyone who left comments on the previous video, especially to Muzu8536, who was the first to comment. You're the fastest among our followers. Thank you so much for your support. At a small food shop, we meet our protagonist, Lee Junggu, who was on the phone while jotting down an order that seemed to have been mixed up. At that moment, the shop owner asked if something was wrong, but Lin didn't make a big deal out of it. As usual, his boss had confused soybean sprouts with green bean sprouts, an issue that worried her quite a bit. That's when he reflected on how, after completing his military service, he had started working part-time at a banchan shop across from his home while waiting to resume his studies. His boss, feeling a bit nervous, apologized, explaining that she had trouble distinguishing the packaging. He found it understandable since it had happened before. This was probably the third or fourth time. However, it wasn't something he could simply ignore, especially since the woman, Junson, was the shop owner. Soyeon kept apologizing, afraid he would get upset, but he assured her that wasn't the case. In his mind, he knew that with such a scatterbrained boss, the logical choice would be to quit. However, after learning that she was raising her daughter alone and had built the business from the ground up, he decided not to turn his back on her. Besides, after working together for 4 months, he had concluded that Sooyeon wasn't a bad person. While she struggled to choose the right ingredient, he pointed out the correct one, and she sincerely thanked him. He took the chance to suggest memorizing where everything was, to which she replied, a bit embarrassed, that she still hadn't fully managed to do so. He understood that it was challenging due to the variety of products and didn't mind helping her. However, he reminded her that next month he would be returning to university, so she'd have to manage on her own in his absence. His words seemed to discourage her a little, even though they had already discussed this in advance. Noticing her disappointment, he reassured her, saying she had improved a lot since they started working together, and that he was confident she would do well even without him. He emphasized that her cooking was incredibly good, which was the most important thing in a banchan shop. He also reminded her that thanks to the quality of her food, the shop had a 5-star rating. Just in case, he offered to come help her after classes if she ever needed it. Just then, a beautiful young woman entered the shop. The owner greeted her warmly and asked what brought her there. The girl, Seolha, handed her mother the phone she had forgotten. Soon thanked her, saying she was planning to go look for it later. Upon seeing her, he remembered that Seolha was his boss's daughter and was the same age as him. Despite that, they had never had a proper conversation. When Seolha noticed his presence, she quickly told her mother she had to leave because she had things to do. Lee realized that even though he always greeted her first, she constantly ignored him, something he had already gotten used to. As Seolha wished her mother good sales, he thought that if he were in her shoes, he'd probably also be wary of a suspicious-looking guy working with his mother. However, when their eyes met, he noticed she was looking at him as if he were an insect, even though he hadn't done anything wrong. Feeling disheartened, he wondered if he would ever get the chance to talk to Seolha before returning to university. Was it possible she genuinely disliked him that much? Soon, on the other hand, believed her daughter was just shy, something that seemed to be popular lately. But Lee knew that wasn't the case, even though he didn't pay too much attention to it. He figured that, since his boss was so attractive, many men must have tried to win her over. Meanwhile, Sooyeon secretly wished that Lee and Seolha could get along better. Noticing that he was staring at her, she asked if there was something on her face. Surprised, he simply replied that he was lost in thought. He concluded that, in some way, Sooyeon's stunning appearance must have an impact on sales. She, feeling a bit nervous, didn't understand why he was saying that and joked that if he wanted a raise, he should just ask directly. Lee started to ramble, wondering if they should include photos of Eun with each order, like collectible boss-themed photo cards given out for every written review. However, she dismissed the idea, considering it impractical. He, on the other hand, was serious, thinking it might be necessary if the shop ever faced the risk of closing. Even so, deep down, he knew that once he returned to university, there would be no reason to see either his boss or Seolha again. One evening, Soon prepared an elaborate feast to send off Lee and congratulate him on his return to university. Since it was his day off, Lee initially thought he was being called for something important, but upon arrival, he understood the reason. He wondered if it wasn't too much effort, considering he was the only employee and this seemed excessive for a simple farewell. Nervous, Sooyeon asked if he didn't like the idea, or if he would have preferred the celebration at a restaurant, but Lee quickly denied it, clarifying that wasn't the case. Deep down, he was touched, though he couldn't help but feel uncomfortable due to Seolha's presence. She hadn't spoken a single word since she arrived. Despite that, he thanked them for the meal and mentioned that it looked delicious. That's when Sooyeon suddenly burst into laughter, which Lo found suspicious. She explained that it was nothing, just that she found it amusing to see him outside of work, even though they were practically in the same place. She added that seeing him like this put her in a good mood. Lei didn't understand why, as he believed he always had the same expression. Even so, he was happy to admire the radiant beauty of his boss, a comment that made Soyeon blush. She accused him of lying, joking that he shouldn't bite his tongue while doing so. Intrigued, she directly asked if he had a girlfriend, catching him off guard. Zoon explained that it was just curiosity, as it was natural for someone his age to be interested in romance, yet she had never heard him mention it. Lee replied that it wasn't something he could have just because he wanted to. Girls simply didn't show interest in him. This surprised Soyeon, as she saw him as someone popular. However, Lei didn't think so and added that he was too busy to even consider those things. He was about to say something more, but suddenly found himself staring at Yoon in silence, lost in thought. Nervous, he explained that he had just gotten distracted for a moment. However, she found it suspicious that he stopped speaking mid-sentence. Trying to cover it up, Lei apologized and got up to go to the bathroom, promising to return soon. As he left, he noticed that Seolha was watching him intently. In the bathroom, Lei reflected on what he had been about to say. For a brief moment, he let himself imagine what it would be like if his boss were his girlfriend. However, he quickly dismissed the thought as ridiculous. That's when he noticed the doorknob start to turn. To his surprise, the one who entered was Seolha. Confused, Lee reminded her that he had gotten there first and that she should knock before entering, even if he wasn't using the bathroom at the moment. But Seolha didn't seem to care much, considering they were the only 3 people in the shop. Even so, Lee insisted on knowing why she had barged in so suddenly. That's when Seolha, without hesitation, asked if he liked Sooyeon. The question left the room in complete silence. Lee had no idea what she was talking about, but Seolha, with a firm look, stated that she had seen men like him before. According to her, Sooyeon was kind to Lee, and that made her think he might be getting the wrong idea, just like others had before. She assumed that, seeing how well Sooyeon treated him, Lee was probably planning to take her to a prayer service or something similar. Completely confused, Lee asked her to wait a moment. He had never had such intentions, and he felt her words were far too harsh. He had never even considered anything like that, and couldn't understand why she was saying it. To Seolha, however, it was obvious. She had noticed how Le often stared at Zoon's hidden features, finding it rather telling. Seeing him stay silent only confirmed her suspicions. With honesty, Seolha admitted that she had advised her mother against hiring male employees, convinced that they would eventually try something with her. Lee, in his mind, wondered if she wasn't exaggerating. He had never once thought of his boss that way. He didn't understand why he had to sit there and listen to these accusations. So, instead of arguing, he decided to simply say that he did like Sooyeon. The statement left them both in silence. Seolha couldn't comprehend how he could say something like that. Suddenly, as if she hadn't heard a word he said, Seolha's intentions were clear to Lee. She was warning him to stay away from Eun and leave. However, he clarified that it wasn't as she assumed. He admitted that he found Zoon pretty and kind, and that working together had naturally made him grow fond of her, but that was all. He had no intention of taking things further. He explained that looking at the panels had been an accident, and that he was fully aware of how much harassment his boss had endured from men who only came to the shop to ask for her number. He also acknowledged why Seolha was so upset seeing him around Eun, but he questioned why she had to say all of that as if he were that kind of person. Lee added that if he truly had any hidden motives, he would have confessed to her a long time ago. He explained that he was simply working hard and that, in the beginning, it hadn't been easy to work under a boss who didn't even know how to run things properly. Though he admitted that Eun had improved a lot, he couldn't forget how she had nearly collapsed from exhaustion when they first started. Then, he looked directly at Seolha and asked if she even knew how much her mother had struggled. Even if she was a bit clumsy, he only wanted to help her without any ulterior motive. Yes, he liked her, but he had no intention of causing problems. Besides, he would soon return to university, so he asked Seolha to just tolerate his presence until then, even if she didn't like seeing him around. Seolha, confused, couldn't understand how someone could like another person without expecting anything in return. To her, all men were the same, always making excuses. Still, she chose to ignore him and told him to leave the bathroom, saying she was done listening to his nonsense. She even hinted that, now that he realized he had no chance with Zoon, he was trying something with her instead. Annoyed, Lee simply replied, "Fine," and left. Seolha just watched him go without adding anything else. Meanwhile, Lee reflected on what had gone wrong. He didn't understand the situation, though he knew that on the surface, Seolha was just as beautiful as Zoon, except with a completely opposite personality. However, he decided not to dwell on it, as this would probably be the last time they ever spoke. As he walked, he suddenly felt a presence behind him. It was Sooyeon, watching him with a noticeable blush. She explained that she hadn't realized he had left the bathroom and had gone looking for him because he was taking too long. This completely caught him off guard. Zoon continued, saying she had assumed something bad had happened, but was relieved that wasn't the case. Then she lied, claiming that luckily the bathrooms were soundproof and she hadn't heard anything they talked about. Hearing that, Lee mentally accepted his fate. When he returned to the dinner, he was visibly uneasy, as if sitting on pins and needles. Though he tried to act normal and took his seat, he couldn't shake the certainty that Sooyeon had heard everything. From that moment on, she didn't say a single word to him. Lee could only imagine Sooyeon telling him that she now understood why Seolha hated him, wondering if she thought the same. As they worked together, he feared that Sooyeon now found him completely unpleasant. Those thoughts filled him with anxiety. He didn't want that to happen. He blamed himself for being so impulsive with his confession in that place. He couldn't understand why he hadn't just denied everything. At that moment, he felt like a complete idiot. Seolha, noticing his strange behavior, announced that she should leave. Though she had canceled her plans to attend a party so she could stay until the end of the dinner, she no longer saw a reason to stay any longer. Sooyeon offered to walk her out, but Seolha insisted that it wasn't necessary since the party was nearby. She also pointed out that Sooyeon should stay and eat, as she had barely touched her food while talking. Lee, on the other hand, felt as if Seolha had been watching him like a criminal this whole time, only to now leave him in this situation. At the same time, he thought this might be his chance to calm down. However, he also knew that if Seolha left, he and Oyeon would be alone. That thought made him blurt out, "Wait." Seolha, surprised, didn't understand his sudden change in attitude, especially since Lo had been eating calmly just a moment ago. Despite his nerves, he tried to convince her that it was dangerous to be out alone so late and offered to walk her for safety. In reality, he just wanted to get out of there to clear his head. As he struggled to explain that the streets weren't safe, Seolha, clearly irritated, looked at him as if he were nothing but a nuisance, unable to understand why he was acting as if they were so close. Hearing this, Lee could only remain silent while Seolha said goodbye to her mother, telling her to call if anything happened. In his mind, he was screaming for her not to leave, but he convinced himself that he was probably overreacting, especially since Sooyeon seemed unaffected. However, when he glanced at her, he noticed that she was eating too quickly, confirming that she was just as anxious as he was. Suddenly, Zoon started choking, and Lee, reacting quickly, handed her a glass of water. She drank it to help swallow her food while he urged her to calm down and not stress so much. Zoon thanked him, but the atmosphere remained tense. In his mind, Lee felt completely lost. Then, Sooyeon finally broke the silence and spoke to him honestly. She admitted that she had heard everything while standing outside the bathroom, including the part where he said he liked her and wanted her to be his girlfriend. Lee, slightly disheartened, confirmed that he had indeed said that. But before he could add anything else, Zoon apologized, explaining that the situation was very complicated for her. This left Lee speechless. Zoon asked him not to misunderstand. She wasn't saying that she didn't like him. In fact, she was actually happy to know that someone like him had feelings for her. She had assumed it was the opposite, that he disliked her. However, she felt that they weren't compatible, especially since he would soon return to university while she had to continue running the shop. For Lee, this situation made him reflect on what he truly expected. After all, Seolha, Zoon's daughter, was the same age as him. Even so, Zoon went on to say that she felt Lo was too close to other girls, and that once he went back to university, he probably wouldn't have time for someone like her. Lee noticed that Sooyeon was taking the situation very seriously, and given her personality, she was rejecting him in the kindest way possible. Because of that, he decided to respond that he understood and that it was fine, especially since he wasn't even sure how things between them could have worked from the start. However, he assured her that there was one thing he was completely certain of. He wouldn't find anyone as beautiful as her at university. Even though she was turning him down, Lee couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Since it was getting late, he decided to start cleaning up. He even asked if Seolha had tried to contact Sooyeon, taking the opportunity to thank her for the meal she had prepared. Noticing that there was still plenty of food left, he asked if he could take some home. Just as he was about to grab a bag to pack it up, Sooyeon suddenly stopped him by calling his name directly. She seemed nervous as she asked him if he was okay, leaving Le visibly confused. Blushing, Sooyeon apologized and explained that even though they hadn't spent that much time together, in the months they had known each other, she had realized something. He was terrible at lying. Lei couldn't understand why she was suddenly bringing that up. Concerned, Sooyeon admitted that she knew it wasn't easy for him, but she could tell that in a way he was already feeling rejected. She sensed that he was going through a tough time, no matter how hard he tried to act like he wasn't. That's why she told him that if he wasn't feeling well, he didn't have to come to work the next day. She reassured him that he didn't need to worry about his paycheck. She would still pay him for the remaining time. She acknowledged how hard he had worked and suggested he take this chance to rest before heading back to university. While apologizing, she admitted that, in a way, she understood that this was partly her fault. Lei knew deep down that one of the reasons he liked Sooyeon was precisely because of how considerate she was. Even though he tried to hide his sadness, he now understood that it was impossible to conceal it completely. Gathering his courage, he gently held her arms and told her that it was okay. He wasn't someone who got too sentimental. However, he then asked her directly if she simply didn't want to see him anymore. Zoon, flustered, quickly denied it. Lee, being honest, admitted that yes, he felt a little sad. But he also made it clear that his feelings and his job were two separate things. Besides, he joked that if someone asked him why he quit his job just because his boss turned him down, it would sound pretty ridiculous. That's why he assured her that he wasn't going to quit, because he still wanted to see her beautiful face every day. Hearing those words, Sooyeon fell into deep thought before finally telling Lee that she had changed her mind. Her comment left him puzzled. He couldn't tell if she meant that she truly didn't want to see him anymore, or if she was hinting at something else. This made him wonder if quitting would have been the better choice. However, to his surprise, Sooyeon made an unexpected decision. She accepted his confession. Lee was completely stunned, unable to find the right words. The next day, he was near the city, seemingly waiting for someone, all while still trying to process how he had ended up in this situation. Suddenly, he heard a voice calling his name. When he turned around, he was left speechless. Sooyeon was approaching, dressed in a beautiful outfit, smiling as she asked why he had decided to come out so early. That afternoon, the two enjoyed their date, sharing a meal together. Later, while watching a movie at the theater, their hands brushed against each other until they ended up intertwined, causing Lei to blush intensely. Even though Sooyeon felt a bit embarrassed, she couldn't hide the happiness on her face. Throughout the day, they visited an arcade and ended the evening with a lovely dinner. Sooyeon had so much fun that she commented on how time had flown by, something they both wished would happen during work hours as well. It was then that Sooyeon, a little shy, asked Leo what he thought about going on a date with her. She wanted to know if he regretted it, even admitting that at some moments she had wondered if she should have just stayed home reading her comics instead. Lee, not fully understanding her concerns, reassured her that for him, it had been the happiest moment of his life. Hearing that, Sooyeon let out a soft laugh, though she couldn't resist asking what had been the second happiest moment for him. Lee answered honestly. It was when he first started working at the shop and got the chance to meet her. That response filled Sooyeon with joy. She told him she was glad he was satisfied with everything and could return to university without regrets. However, as she reflected on their time together, she began to realize just how important Lou had become to her. So much so that the thought of letting another girl have him felt unbearable. She even wondered if she should quit her job and truly become his girlfriend. On the other hand, Lei knew deep down that Sooyeon had only accepted his confession for a single day, yet he couldn't quite understand her reasons. For him, spending time with her had been an amazing experience, even if it was only for a short while. He assumed that Sooyeon just wanted to create good memories before he left. That was when Lei, in a teasing tone, joked that he would also take responsibility for Seolha, even if it wouldn't be easy. He never imagined that something so simple could turn out to be this fun. Sooyeon, understanding the joke, decided to play along, but she quickly shifted the conversation by asking what they should do next on their date. Le hesitated. He didn't have a clear answer. He wasn't sure what else to do since he felt like they had already exhausted all their options. Being new to dating, he had no idea what to choose next. Noticing his uncertainty, Soyeon suddenly remembered that there was still something important left to do. According to her, if they claimed to be a couple but hadn't done this, it would be an unforgivable mistake. This piqued Lo's curiosity, and he followed her as she led him somewhere special. Along the way, he wondered where she was taking him until Soyeon finally stopped, excitedly pointing ahead, announcing that they had arrived. When Lo looked past her, he saw a breathtaking, magical town. For a brief moment, he imagined that Soyeon was suggesting they hold a wedding ceremony, a thought that flustered him deeply. Even though he knew that couples often did things like this, he couldn't shake the fact that they weren't actually a real couple. No matter how much he tried to reason through it, he couldn't be certain if everything was truly okay. His thoughts were abruptly interrupted when Soyeon, looking slightly confused, asked why he wasn't following her. Lei, suddenly nervous, didn't know how to respond. Soyeon, realizing she had gotten a little carried away, apologized for getting too excited, but Lee shook his head, assuring her that wasn't the reason for his hesitation. Taking a deep breath, he finally apologized, explaining that he was just mentally preparing himself. Soyeon, amused, asked if he really needed that much time for something so simple. Meanwhile, Lo couldn't believe that Soyeon had gone this far just to be with him. In his mind, he imagined her leading him down an unexpected path, guided by her innocence and sincerity. However, he reminded himself that the world they lived in didn't require him to feel so anxious. As he attempted to step into the magical town, Soyeon suddenly asked in surprise where he was going, since her intention had been to enter a nearby photo studio instead. Both of them fell silent as they realized the misunderstanding. The words just wouldn't come out, and at that moment, they found themselves staring at each other, blushing, unsure of what to say. Lee scolded himself internally for ruining the situation. He couldn't understand how a magical town was located right next to a photography studio. Realizing he had tried to walk in without thinking, he feared that Soyeon might see him as a hopeless fool. He knew that if this had been a real date, his companion would have abandoned him right then and there. He needed to clear up the misunderstanding quickly. Just then, he heard Soyeon apologize. She explained that she hadn't realized how common these things had become among young people and assumed it was something completely normal. Lee, on the other hand, knew she had misunderstood everything, so he hurriedly explained that it had been a simple mistake. He admitted that he had been lost in thought while walking and hadn't even noticed where he had ended up. He sincerely apologized for the confusion. Soyeon listened to his explanation with a smile, acknowledging that the misunderstanding hadn't been anything serious. Even so, she apologized for making the wrong assumption. Lee insisted that it wasn't necessary since the mistake had been his. Despite the initial awkwardness, he felt relieved that everything was cleared up. Wanting to make the most of the moment, he suggested they go in and take some photos, since he had never visited a place like that before and was excited to try it. However, he couldn't help but notice Soyeon's silence, wondering if she was still upset about what had happened. Breaking the quiet, Soyeon asked if he was sure about doing this. She reminded him that the day before, he had said he wanted them to experience everything they were curious about during their date so they wouldn't have any regrets. She assured him that he didn't need to worry about her. She was fine with whatever he chose, even if they decided to visit the magical town instead. After all, she was there as his girlfriend, so it wouldn't be strange for them to do something special together. Her words left Lee even more flustered. He had no idea how he had ended up in such an unusual situation or what he was supposed to do about it. Soyeon then continued, explaining that she had never been inside a magical town before but had always been curious about it. She thought this was the perfect opportunity to explore it together. Trying to shift the conversation, Lei confessed that he had truly enjoyed the day. He told Soyeon that just working alongside her had already made him incredibly happy, but getting to have a date with her had felt like a dream come true. Although he wanted to continue experiencing new things, he admitted that he was feeling tired and that it was probably best to head home. He also mentioned that Soyeon had work the next day and that it was important for her to get enough rest. However, Soyeon didn't entirely believe him. Even though her cheeks were flushed, she pointed out that he was a terrible liar. After all, he had done the same thing the day before. She asked him directly if he planned to keep making excuses like that. Then, in a more serious tone, she urged him to be completely honest. For the last time, she asked if he was truly okay with ending their date there, going home without doing anything more memorable. When they finally arrived at the magical town, Soyeon was amazed. It was even better than she had imagined. Lee, feeling a little nervous, agreed, but couldn't help but chuckle. Noticing his discomfort, Soyeon suddenly asked if he intended to just sit there the whole time. She invited him to sit next to her, assuring him that he'd be more comfortable that way. Lee, embarrassed, didn't know how to respond and ended up lying, saying he preferred to stay where he was. This made Soyeon laugh, prompting Lee to ask what was so funny. Between giggles, she apologized and commented that the day felt different from usual. She admitted that she wasn't sure if she'd call it interesting, but it was definitely unique. Soyeon then mentioned that when they worked together, Lee always had a somewhat intimidating expression, something he had never realized. However, now that she was paying closer attention, she could see a completely different side of him. She confessed that before, it had made her a little nervous, making it hard for her to talk to him. Lee had no idea she had felt that way, but he acknowledged that it was normal to feel nervous, especially around someone you liked. Hearing this, Soyeon found him even more adorable. She couldn't say a word as her face turned bright red.